what has happened, the result of this, is a generational gap. Generations are divided, and God is giving us a prophetic call to fight for generational reconciliation. Generational divide has horrendous consequences in society. Horrendous. I'm just going to mention a couple. For example, over 80% of people that are in prison come from a fatherless home. For example, 71% of teen pregnancy has to do with fatherlessness. 71% of people that are homeless is a direct result of fatherlessness. And the United States Census Bureau says that the number one factor that is going to determine that somebody's going to be poor for the rest of their lives is fatherlessness. It's not going to college. It's not even not going to high school. So fatherlessness and basically the generational divide that there is between fathers and sons and daughters is causing a tremendous negative influence in society. But not only that, when we learn to see this with spiritual eyes, we understand that it not only affects society, it has to do with God's purposes, with God's generational purposes. So I want to read Psalms 33:11. I'm going to try to go fast because I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I have to leave here at 1:25 because my wife and me and our family, we're going to suffer for you guys. We're living on a cruise, okay? Later today. Because we felt that we needed to pray for you for 8 days. So that's why we're leaving Prophecy and Gabby, so that they can pray for you for 8 days while we go on a cruise, okay? So tomorrow at this time, we'll be at Atlantis in the Bahamas in a water slide, meditating on Romans. So Psalms 33:11 says, "But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations." So it's key to understand that when there's a generational divide, not only society is affected, God's generational purposes are affected too. So if we want to accept the call to fight for generational reconciliation, that means that we also have to fight for restoring fatherhood. We cannot reconcile generations if fatherhood is not restored, because fatherhood is like the glue that provides the cohesion and the unity between generations. When there's no fatherhood, immediately generations grow divided. And I don't want to speak bad about moms. Moms are incredible. But statistics don't lie. Even when moms do the best that they can do, mom cannot be dad. And moms can provide certain type of fatherhood, but it's not the same. Because if moms could provide fatherhood, society wouldn't be as it is. Because moms have tried to occupy the space or the void that we men have left behind. And even though they've been there and they've worked, I don't know where the world will be without mothers. But I know where the world will be with fathers. So I honor moms. But we're not speaking about moms today. We're speaking about the importance of fathers and what they and only they can provide. Fatherhood. Which is a necessity for generational reconciliation. So our message as a church has to elevate, I love that word, has to elevate fatherhood to its true level of relevance in God's purposes. So we have to take this message of fatherhood and elevate it so that it equals the relevance it has for God's purposes. I want to show you a picture. Kari, you have the picture? And this was last week. I told you to pray for me that I was going to a summit. And this summit called The Bridge, because basically this summit's purpose is to bridge the gap between races, between generations, between man and woman. And so it's incredible. It's led by a true apostle of God called Joseph Matera. And in this place, I was with true generals of the faith. Because sometimes somebody calls, oh, you're a general of the faith. A general? No. I was there with true generals, Bishop Dale Bronner, Bishop Harry Jackson, who speaks in CNN, often, and José Matera. Incredible prophetic voices were there. And at this moment, we're praying over the new generation. You're going to say, but those guys don't look too young. Well, maybe they don't look too young, but those guys that you see there are guys that already pastor incredible churches. They lead powerful ministries. So in ministry, they are the new generation because they're in their 30s and they're already doing great things for the kingdom and for God. So I was sensing that God wanted me to pray for them for fatherhood, for identity. But since it's the first time that I was going there, I didn't want to promote myself. So I said, Holy Spirit, if you want me to pray for them, you tell Bishop Matera to call me. And I was there, and Bishop Matera came to me with a microphone and I said, Jose, I just sense that the Spirit wants you to pray for them regarding identity and fatherhood. When the Spirit speaks, the Spirit speaks. So I'm there decreeing. So why did I wanted to show you that picture? Because I love what Bishop Matera is doing here. He's intentionally elevating the message of fatherhood to impact the next generation and to bridge the divide between generations. So basically, he's fighting for generational reconciliation. But that's the only place I've seen that. This doesn't happen too often. So if we want to be a church that impacts the community, we need to accept the call to fight for generational reconciliation. It's the only way God's purposes are going to be established in our community. And nowadays, when we speak about fatherhood, some people think that fatherhood has to do with bearing children. Is that how you say it? Having children? Procreating? Or maybe forming a home? You see, humanism has taken a grasp even of the church. And humanism has made the church become self-centered. And the church, we're using this beautiful institution called church to satisfy ourselves. So even when we speak about fatherhood, that is something that has to do with God's generational purposes, we have taken fatherhood and made it about us. For example, in the times of the Bible, when you spoke about adoption was not about giving a son to a father. Adoption had to do with giving a father to a son. Because the Jewish people understood that if there was a son or a daughter, a young man or a young girl that didn't have a father, that would affect the whole nation of Israel. That's why when you go to a place, for example, I don't know if that happens here in Miami, and I think it does, but in Barranquilla, Colombia, if somebody from the Hebrew community, the Jewish community, would come to the city, they didn't have anything, the Jewish community would embrace them, would lend them money, and would help them start a new business. And in 5 years, you will see that person, and he had grown financially in the community, because the Jewish community understood that that person, if they didn't help him, he would become the weak link for the nation or for the culture. So they wouldn't allow themselves to have somebody that was not strong, was not solid financially, because they were not thinking about that person or themselves. They were thinking about a nation. And they understood that they needed to think and fight for the well-being of the whole nation. So that's how Jewish people are. So in Jesus' time, adoption was created to give children a father, because they understood that if those children were left without a father, they were left without an inheritance, without a generational blessing. And God's generational blessing would be stopped. So with that mindset, because they saw fatherhood different, they said, okay, we need to do something. We cannot allow anybody to remain as an orphan. It had to do more than loving somebody. It was something more transcendent than I want to have children because now our home is complete. Or if a woman doesn't have children, she's not a woman. No, it was something much more transcendent than that. It had to do with the nation's well-being and God's generational purposes. This is something very profound that we're speaking about here. And we need to define fatherhood according to God's perspective and purpose, not according to humanism. And I want to read a verse. It's Exodus 3:15. I want you to see this. It says, God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your father. So I want you to see that almost every time that God was going to give us an important message or commission a mission to somebody, God would always refer to the forefathers and would take them back. And he says, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. So what God did is that he would go into the present time and take what was about to what was happening, what was about to happen, the purpose he was going to give them, and immediately include it in the context of a generation. He wouldn't just tell them to do something or give them a purpose. Immediately God, before giving them or telling them what to do, he would remind them, you belong to a line, a generational line. You represent something bigger than yourselves. So what I'm about to commission to you, you have to understand it's not only about you, it's where you come from and where you're going. So when we speak about fatherhood, we need to understand fatherhood in the context of generations, because biblically, fatherhood is framed in a generational dynamic. You see, when I practice or when I exercise my fatherhood with Danny, even though it has to do with him and with me, in that scene, it's not only Danny and me, it's José Victor, my father, José Victor, my grandfather, José Victor, my great-grandfather. Yes, I'm the fourth. And it's Danny and Danny's son or daughter and Danny's grandchildren. And that generational line carries God's generational purposes. So if I don't see fatherhood like that, what I'm doing is I'm taking true fatherhood out of context, and I am promoting a generational divide because I'm disconnecting myself from the origin, and I'm disconnecting Danny from the destiny, because remember, God is the Alpha and the Omega, the origin and the destiny. Everything originates in God, and everything has to go back to God. It's like a circle, and all that in the middle is a generational line that carries God's purposes until everything comes back to him in glory. So God, his glory emanates from him through all generations. Each generation has to give it to the next generation until it comes back, because he's the Alpha and the Omega. And if I don't understand that, I'm going to take Danny and me and I'm going to exclude us and just bring us out of that context. And there's going to be, God's generational line is going to be cut. I don't know if I'm being clear with what I'm saying here right now. Okay, so God says, he has sent me to you. This is my name forever. The name you shall. You see, I represent something eternal. Even though I'm being given to do, I have to do something that is for today, I represent something eternal. And he says, go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you up out of misery in Egypt. So God says, the only way you're going to understand this purpose and you're going to be able to fulfill this purpose is if you see everything I'm giving you as part of a generational line. I don't know if there's a way to explain what I'm trying to tell you. So biblically, fatherhood has to do with generational dynamic. Fatherhood cannot be understood or lived. True fatherhood cannot be understood or lived outside of that generational dynamic. Because fatherhood has to do with where you come from and where we're going. It's not what we're doing. It's where we come from. Who do we represent? What do we carry? And what do we do with this? Because God wants it to go somewhere. He has a purpose. So knowing where I'm coming from, knowing where we're headed, allows me to understand who I am, what I have, and what do I have to do with it. Wow, I like that, how that sounded. Understanding where I'm coming from. Who do I represent? the generational dynamic, and knowing where I'm headed, my purpose, God's destiny, allows me to understand who I am, who am I, my identity, what to do with what I was given, and the role I play in all that eternal purpose. You see, so I handle things with a different perspective, and I handle children differently. So when I'm watching TV, a soccer game, and Danny tells me, Daddy, can you play with me? It's no longer about, what is it, soccer or Danny? You see, because it can be soccer or Danny. No, it's about soccer or God's generations. Now the choice, the weight of the choice changes a little bit. No weak links. And in order for there to be fatherhood, I'm going to cut to the end because I need to do this. And I'm going to use prophecy. ¿Vienes? Prof, come here, man. So God is asking us to fight for generational reconciliation. We cannot promote generational reconciliation if we don't promote fatherhood. And fatherhood has nothing to do with biology or procreation. Fatherhood is a relationship between two people that understand their role in this generational purpose, line, destiny. And one of them decides to play the role of the father, and the other one decides to play the role of a son or a daughter. And each of them have the right heart. If I'm going to be the father, I have to have the heart of a father. If he's going to be the son, he has to have the heart of the son, because it doesn't have to do with him being my son, because he's not my son. I mean, he's not Jesse's son, he's not my son, but he is my son, because in God's purposes, God told me he's like a son to me, and I have to understand how fatherhood works. And fatherhood, we have to understand, is not what comes out of me, the father, to the son, because fatherhood doesn't have to do, it's not a one-way conversation or a one-way practice. Fatherhood is a dynamic, it's a dialogue. So fatherhood not only involves what I give him, fatherhood involves also how he reacts to what I give him. So if there's a father that is giving the love of a father, but there is not a son that is giving the honor of a son to a father, there's no really fatherhood. Because a monologue cannot transfer God's eternal purposes. It has to be a dialogue. So fatherhood is not a one-way vector. Fatherhood is a dialogue between two generations that understand that they cannot be divided, and the place they play in God's generational line. So I know where I'm coming from. I know what I represent, and I teach it to him. He knows what I represent and what is in behind me. So then he looks forward and he knows where he's going through or to, because I've taught him. So this dialogue allows us to understand both where we're coming from, where we're headed, and allows me to give him whatever I need to give him so he can take it to the next generation. But you need both. So you need a father. Repeat after me. You need a father with a father's heart. And this is a father's heart. This is a father's heart. A father's heart, its foundation is unconditional love. In the dynamic of fatherhood, everything I give you has to do with love. A father's heart says, it doesn't matter how bad you do. I'll never love you less than I love you now. It doesn't matter how good you do, because it won't make me love you more, because I don't love you because of what you do. You see, I love you because of who you are. You are my son. I love you unconditionally. So that's the foundation for my relationship with him. So the heart of the father says, you know, I'm preparing you to take my place. You're not a threat to me. In fact, on purpose, I'm preparing you to replace me one day. Because that's what Jesus did with the disciples. He trained them to take his place. So I'm not going to kick you and send you somewhere when I feel threatened by your gifts. No. I'm waiting for that day. I want to see the day you're prepared to take my place, because that's what's going to happen. You see, a father's heart says, It brings me joy to see you do greater things than me. Because Jesus said, you're going to do greater things than me. So a true father, he enjoys when a son or a daughter can do greater things than him. You're going to do greater things than me. A true heart of a father says, I accept and embrace your generation. You don't have to look like me. You don't have to talk like me. You don't have to like the music I like. You don't have to do things the way I do them. I just don't want you to lose the essence. I don't want you to lose the purpose. But you can communicate God's truth however you want. You know your generation's language more than me. I embrace your generation. And a heart of a father says, I believe in you. I do believe in you. That's why you're here working with me. I believe in you. And the heart of the son says, like if he's speaking, says, I honor you unconditionally. Father, there's nothing bad that you will do as a father that will make me honor you less. Or anything good that you can do that will make me honor you more. Because, understand me, I don't honor you because of what you do. I honor you because of who you are. And God gave you to me as a father. Doesn't matter what you do, you'll never lose my honor for you. You see, the heart of the son says, I'm preparing myself, I'm training myself to fulfill what God put in your heart. Because God said to Joshua, Joshua, rise up. Moses has died, and you will take these people to the place, to the promise, to the land I promised to your father. So he has to say, you know what? Maybe I use another language, some other music, but I'm not going to take this place to a different promised land. When it's my turn, I'll never forget what God spoke to you, and I'll take them to that same place. The heart of a son says, even if I do greater things than you, in my heart, you will always be greater than me. Because Jesus said, the disciple will never be greater than the master. You see, what is happening here is there's no competition. We're both working for God's purposes. A son says, I understand, I will never forget that everything I have is because of what you gave me. And the heart of a son says, I will never allow your name to be forgotten. Because there's no greater pain for a father than to see a son take his place with the only intent of erasing his name and creating a name for himself. And that I can tell you by my own experience. He's not only working to make God's name greater, he's also working to preserve the name of his father. Because the moment he stops doing that, he disconnects from the generational line and creates a divide. Because the divide is not only between he and his children, it's also between he and his father. Are you understanding what we're speaking about? We want to have in this church a culture of reconciliation. Reconciling marriages, reconciling races, reconciling generations, reconciling. Because the Bible says in 2 Corinthians that God gave us the ministry of reconciliation. So I wonder, why is the church dividing so much? Why do we work and preach to divide when we were called to reconcile?